Hello everybody, my name is Brian, you're from Father Fountain, and welcome to Vietnam Talk. And today in Vietnam Talk we had a kind of a different subject. Today we're going to talk about books. And before we start to talk about this book related to Vietnam, then I'm going to tell me a little bit about my relationship to books. When I grew up, I loved to go to public libraries, or I like to go to the libraries in my school. And in my parents' house, we had a lot of books, and we liked to read the books, and all books had different stories, different pictures, and yeah, it was a good time. And now I grew up, and the younger generation mostly like to have e-books and audio books, and it's not something people read a lot anymore. But still, I had this pleasure to get in touch with an author named Steven DeBonis. Steven made a very interesting book named Children of the Enemies, and that book is about the Amerasian, the mothers, and the life. Steven spent time in Vietnam, he spent time in the refugee camp in Philippines, and he met so many Amerasian, he met so many mothers, he had so many great interviews, and I don't want to start to talk about Steven's book. I prefer Steven to tell me about his book and why he made the book. And yeah, I'm really appreciated that Steven will take the time, and I'm looking forward to talk to him. And I hope you're enjoying his book and our interview. Right. Anyway, welcome to Vietnam Talk, and I'm really appreciate you take the time to talk to me.
My pleasure.
Please tell me where you're based in this world.
At the moment, I'm in Florida.
Wow, in a sunny state.
It's sunny, but we're getting a hurricane either tomorrow or Thursday, so I have to prepare for a hurricane. Tonight, I'm going to have to prepare.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about yourself, because the only things I know, you made a very good book, and one of the first book I read about the Amerasians. And
okay. Well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I went to the University of Connecticut. After that, I lived in California for 3 or 4 years. I lived in Brazil. I traveled in Asia and started working for a contractor of the U.S. refugee program in the camps in Thailand. So in Thailand, I worked first in Ban Vinai, which was a camp for Hmong. It was right by the Mekong River, and the Hmong would swim across. At night, we lived in the town, and at night there would be, on the Laos side of the river, there would be machine guns and bombs going off, and then the refugees would come swimming across, and they would go to the camp.
What year was that? That sounds crazy.
1980. Yeah, and those are Hmong tribesmen from Laos. From there, that program closed, and I was sent to Panat Nakhon, which is about 2 hours south of Bangkok. And that had all the ethnic groups, Vietnamese, Khmer, Lao, and the tribes, Hmong, Mien, and the other tribes. From there, I got a job in the refugee program in the Philippines.
And I know this place.
Pardon me?
That's in Bataan?
In Bataan province, yeah. Very good. Wow. You pronounced it well. Yeah, in Bataan province. And I actually stayed there for more than 10 years. My wife and I stayed there for more than 10 years. And that had all the refugee groups. And the camp also had at various times, I worked for the American program, but at various times there were German programs, French programs. I think there was some Scandinavian program. There was an Australian program. They came and went. They weren't permanent. And then I moved to Japan, and I stayed there until about 7 years ago.
Wow. So how come that when you end up in this camp in the Philippines, I guess it's the same place I went in '93, this Philippine Refugee Processing Center. That's right?
Right, but I left in in October of 1992, so I didn't see you there. Same place.
I guess it was a big place. I mean, one of the reasons when I saw about read the book and you had all the photos from the camps, it's like it took me back to this time. You know, I remember I had all the billets. They call the billets, the barracks, made by trees and papers and I don't know what. And I remember the big market and the temples and the place they call the monkey house.
The Monkey House, yeah. That's in the book, yeah.
You know, I was like, I mean, you're the first one, and actually, I talked to your wife on Facebook, and you're the first one I really talked to, besides the Amerasians and the refugees. You're the first one I physically talked to who been to this place. Maybe not in the same time, but you went there, and even we don't have the same experience because you were working there. I was just volunteer there for a short time, but still. Is wow for me to have somebody to talk to who had actually been there and even wrote a book about it. I mean,
great. Yeah. Great.
How come you made a book about it?
Well, the camp went through different periods as far as the ethnic groups that were predominant. Sometimes it was Khmer, sometimes it was Lao. They had the hill tribes, and then they had the Montagnards, which actually are various tribes from Vietnam. And then when the Amerasians came, and they were a completely different group, and the program had to change to deal with them. We had to have a lot of special services to deal with them. And I started doing these actually to use in the educational program as reading material for the refugees. And then when I started gathering them, I said, these are really interesting. And I decided to turn them into a book. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I remember when I met the Amerasians in '92, but that was in Vietnam. I don't know if you ever went to Vietnam to meet them personally.
Yes, I did. I have actually, I worked there one summer.
And it was different for me to meet them in Vietnam than meet them in the Philippines. Because when I met them in Vietnam, they were more fragile. They were living in the street. They were unsecure if they were able to go to the US, and they felt like they don't trust anybody. And when they came to Philippines, they felt a little bit more secure. I mean, some of them did stupid things and ended up in the monkey house, and some probably didn't make it to the US, but mostly made it to the US, and they felt more secure. I mean, I saw a lot of bad things in the camp in the Philippines: violence, people drunk, drug users, mental problems. I mean, I guess you saw the same things. And
well, there are thousands of people there from various ethnic groups. You know, it's a city, and you have all the problems that you have in a city. In addition to that, you have with the Amerasians, it's an at-risk population because you have a population that was oppressed and discriminated against and had to live on the margins in their own country. So these people had to develop survival strategies. When they came to the camp, some of those strategies were no longer viable or acceptable, but that's what they were used to. So you have all the city problems there.
Wow. I mean, I when I read the books, and actually because I know a few of those people in reality, and I mean I had maybe never met them. I know them on Facebook, and I've been talking to them, and it's more like it's interesting to see how they fit into the US right now, because they're all growing up, they're old, you know, they had kids and grandkids, and I saw it on your photos, I saw the stories, and I read the stories, and I can only imagine what kind of life they came from, you know.
Once in a while, I'll get contacted by somebody either from the book or one of the other non-Amerasian refugees. They'll find me on Facebook, and that's a great thing. The people who have contacted me, actually from the book, I think I only have two, but they've basically done well. And I visited some of my Hmong refugee friends. This is a long time ago, and they have done well as well. I'm happy to see that. Yeah, especially the kids. The kids adapt.
So how come you end up doing a book? I mean, I know you collect a lot of histories, just like me. You know, I did this for 30 years, and I could make a big book about all the stories, and nobody would believe it anyway, because it's so incredible. You know, how can you put a book together? I'm so interesting how you can make a book. And even for me, who's into it, I understand it, but somebody outside wouldn't understand it, would it?
Well, this is what I did. As I told you, I began collecting the stories as part of an educational process in order to use in the educational program in the camp. When I decided to make the book, I realized I needed more of a background in Vietnamese history about how the Amerasians, how they were in Vietnam. And so we had Vietnamese counselors and educational supervisors in the camp who actually were refugees themselves or the children of refugees and worked in the camp. So a few of them who I think I've given credit to, and I know I've given credit to in the book, gave me a lot of information. On top of that, I ordered a lot of reading material. This is before the internet, so
I know.
That gave me a good background. And then I basically put the stories together and I sent it out to a publisher, and I was lucky. The first publisher had accepted it, so I just went with that publisher.
But did you ever show the book to any Amerasians? I mean, after?
Well, yeah, some of them actually got copies of the book, but how many I don't know. I sent copies to to the translators, the interpreters who worked with me, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say what I don't know. I don't know how many have actually seen the book. This I don't know. You know, it became very hard to keep in touch with the refugees, especially before the internet came up, because they moved all over the place. So I'd mail a letter, and then a letter would come back to the address. In fact, this was very frequently. And then maybe I would hear from them again, maybe I wouldn't. Sometimes I heard from them years later. You know, like I remember one I heard from in Japan years after I wrote the book. And somehow she got my address in Japan and wrote to me. It might have been through my publisher, I'm not sure. So, yeah.
So I'm wondering how about the American public when they read the book? How is the reactions for your book? Are people feeling something about it? I mean, it's something that's hurt, you know, it's painful.
I've gotten a few letters of people who said, thank you. I knew nothing about this before I read your book, maybe 3 or 4.
Okay.
Both from Americans and from sometimes children of refugees. I got a couple of those. But how it was accepted in the wider public, I can't say, because it's not a bestseller. It's not that people have read it, you know, so I don't know. It's in, you know, it was I think my publisher marketed it more for an educational, as an educational book, which is not how I wanted to market it. But so it's in like college libraries and places like that. I would have liked it to be more available in public libraries. Yeah.
So I mean, when I read your book, I saw you interview the Amerasian. You actually interview the mothers too. Do you have any kind of a special story? I mean, you can pick out one Amerasian and one mother story that's, I mean, you can still remember today.
You know, Raymond
Chow?
Yeah, he is.
I know him.
Oh, you know him?
Yeah, I know on Facebook.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? So how is he doing?
I hadn't been hearing him for a while, but it looked like he's doing good. I mean, he's getting older, you know, but he's a very famous guy in Vietnam during that time. You know, he took care of his people.
Right. Anyway, he was an interesting character. He had his English was very good, and he had a very persuasive manner about him. So he kind of had a group of other Amerasians who kind of looked up to him. And I found him pretty compelling. However, he was good friends with Tuan Den. who is in the book as well. And somehow, I never got the whole story, but somehow they had a falling out, and Raymond was worried because Tundan's a big guy, and
All
he
right.
got physical violence. That did not happen. He was an interesting character. Charlie was also a very interesting character. He unfortunately couldn't get his life together at all, and he just continued to get into trouble of various kinds. Eventually, he wound up in the Philippine jail in
Wow.
Balanga, which is the
Oh
capital.
yeah, Balanga, yeah.
Yeah, and the ref court guy, the guy who was in charge of like who goes to America and who didn't, told me they were trying to send him back to Vietnam, but Vietnam did not want to accept refugees that had already left. I left the camp while that was going on and never found out how that ended. But it was a shame. He was a nice guy. I liked him. He was complete, like many of the Amerasians, he was completely uneducated and really couldn't make the transition from street survival in Vietnam to the camps. And he was an interesting character. The mothers, they were all pretty interesting. The mothers, Wendy, Mai, and Tui. Let me take a look. I'm looking at the.
That's okay.
I'm looking at the book. I'm looking for somebody specifically who the daughter just contacted me. Let me.
You take your time.
Yeah, Wa and Lon. That was an kind of interesting. I did a lot of interviews with her. It was really, really, Philippines is very, very hot and didn't have power a lot of the time. And so at that time, once my son was born, I bought a car and we'd sit in the car and talk with the aircon running. And that was one way I got to keep on coming back again because she can get out of the heat. She was a bar girl and got pregnant, like many, but not all of them, and was looked down upon by the Vietnamese and eventually made her way to the camps. I think what's interesting also were the gold cases, which I put in the book. These are refugees, Amerasians, who were basically bought by families because they got a ticket out of Vietnam. And for many of them, once they got to the camps, the families would maltreat them and actually split from the family. And some of the families, were investigated and got into trouble. Whether they were sent back or not, I don't know because I left while this was happening. But this was not uncommon, the gold cases where they were given gold in order to come over. Just like anything in any country or city, any way that there is a way for people to get out of a bad situation and better their situation, whether it's ethical or not, people will take that opportunity. It's no different in Vietnam.
Of course.
In Vietnam at all. Let me think of here. There was Mai Lien and Yim, Yim, Diem, Yim, and he had two separate nails on his toe.
Wow.
One nail, and he goes, "That's how I'm going to find my father."
What evidence?
Yeah, the mother said that the father had that as well. And he said, that is how I'm going to find my father. Yeah, and I'm trying to find one other person here. One moment, please.
Sure.
Lam Tukam Lian and Sophie. Sophie was a she had been, according to her mother, and her mother also showed me like magazine covers and such. Sophie was a kind of a model in Vietnam. I don't know, not like a top model, but she did covers and such. And you know, the mother said that these Amerasians were considered considered attractive. I've heard the opposite as well, but that they were considered attractive, and you would see them sometimes in ads or in magazines for products and such. And this is what Sophie did as well. Here, Nguyen Thi Long. Okay, Nguyen Thi Long. I heard from her. Not her, but her daughter, and they made it to Minnesota, and she is one of the few who actually reunited with her American boyfriend, and they stayed together as a family in Minnesota. And I got it was a couple of years ago, I got a Facebook chat from one of the daughters asking me, are you the person who wrote the book? The father died, but the family has done well.
Wow, that's good.
That was a happy story.
Wow. So wondering, you knew the camp closed down in 99 or 98. What year did the camp in Philippines close down? What year?
Yeah, well, I left in 92, and I think it closed, if I'm correct, I think it stayed open 2 years after I left. So it must have closed at the end of 94, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. You never went back again to take a look, because I knew it's Trinity Museum.
I went back around 96, and it had been turned into a technology center.
Yeah,
it wasn't really functioning, and many of the workers in the camp were still. They had moved to Morong, which is the town about 7 or 8 kilometers from the camp, and one of them was like letting people in at the gate. Another one had a restaurant in town. Another one had a sari store. But the camp itself, the billets were all torn down. The only thing that remained of the previous of the incarnation of the camp were the admin area and what they called the papal stage, because Pope John Paul went there just a few months before I came, and he gave a speech at the stage, and the various statues and temples.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, the billets were all knocked down. So I couldn't find my way around because there was nothing to guide me. Yeah.
But it's kind of strange, you know. I mean, some way you feel happy because it's over, and some way you feel sad because you have such a good and bad memory of a place, and you come back, it's just all gone. It's like it never existed.
Definitely so. You've got it exactly right. But you know, nothing stays the same.
Exactly.
So you kind of have to roll with it. You know, when I went back, I knew the camp would not be a refugee camp anymore. And you know what else has changed? That area there was nothing there. It's right on the South China Sea. You were there, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Wrong.
Now
it's a big tourist area. They have like 50 hotels and bungalows along the beaches. I haven't been back for that, but people tell me about that. My friend who went back told me, and I went online, and you can see all the resorts that have opened up, seaside resorts there. When I lived there was absolutely nothing.
No, I remember because at the time I stayed there, they had all the like 11 areas with all the village, and had the administration building. They had the market, and had this place for the study in the schools, different refugees organization, and people were hanging out. And I mean, there was a lot of police and military and guards. It was very dangerous in the nighttime.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah. And that's the only thing I remember, and I remember that it was like a place. I mean, huge place. I said about 10,000 people. You know, somebody staying for 20 years, and now I saw on the Facebook they had different pages for people who went back there, and show photos of turning some museums with photos for the time, and like the temples and the monuments and the cemetery for the dead boat people. You know.
Right.
I mean, that's what left, of the past, and
it's actually in the cemetery. It's not only the boat people, but other refugees as well. When I was there, I remember this was really sad. That a Hmong girl, a tribal from Hill Tribe House, she got bitten by a bug, and her face swelled up, and I took her to the hospital. And I don't know if they didn't give her the correct medicine or the correct dosage, but just from this bug bite, she was only 13 and she died. And she is buried there. I hope that the grave, all the refugee graves have been maintained.
I think so. Yeah. At least what I saw of the photos, it seems like somebody take care of it, maybe by donations or something. I don't know.
I hope so. I am on the refugees. I am on the PRPC websites, a few different ones.
Yeah.
I saw that sometimes some of the refugees went back. Some of the refugees whose relatives died in the camp went back to take care of the graves, which for many Asian people is a very important thing.
I know, and now you went to the camps. I mean, I went to the camps in Vietnam, and I went to the camp in Philippines, and I went to the U.S. And you saw the Amerasian came from Vietnam to the Philippines and to the U.S. in some way because you had the interest in this issue. You saw what happened to them in the U.S. Do you think the 6 months in the Philippines was enough for them to be part of the U.S.? I mean, you had 6 months to learn English, study something, and then you drop you up somewhere in LA or in New York City, and you have to be American.
Who knows what would really be enough? The idea was to get them started. That was the idea. They built, there was a high school in camp, so the kids would get an idea of how an American high school was run. And for the adults, they gave them 5 months of English and CO. I think after that, they have to be in a place where they're going to use the language, if you know what I mean. So it's hard to say. There's a lot of bureaucratic decisions that are made too. How long does the government want to pay for refugees to stay in camp? Things like this. So I guess 6 months is reasonable. I guess. I don't think anyone can actually answer that with any amount of certainty. However, there are refugees who stayed much longer. This was not unusual.
I know. Anyway, so now I know we're almost done this interview. Do you have anything? I mean, you have any story, anything to finish this conversation? Anything you want to remind people about? I mean, you had a fantastic 10 years in the camp, but I only had 1 month and a half. I mean,
this is what I would say. The refugee program, the U.S. refugee program, or programs in Thailand, the Philippines, and Malaysia also, very few Americans know about them. But hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Southeast Asians came through. In the way, it's kind of the Asian equivalent of Ellis Island, for which all the Europeans came through. But Ellis Island is known and is turned into basically a museum. Very, very few people know about the U.S. refugee program in Southeast Asia. And it's a real part of American history. I would like to see it taught just the way Ellis Island is taught, because it's really a part of who America is, I think, anyway.
So what about you today? Are you still making books? Are you still, I mean, I know you told me you're retired from work, and you got any books coming up, anything?
No, I don't. I'm retired and I've gotten lazy. My wife is a very prolific poet, and she's has several books and has a new one coming out very soon, talking me off the roof. But I'm living basically the life of a retiree. I came to Florida because my mother was ill, so
All
I
right.
actually I was living once I retired from Japan. I was living mostly in Europe, taking care of people's houses. Uh, but
Oh,
but when my mother got sick, I wound up in Florida, and here I am.
wow. You know what? I really appreciate you took, let's say, almost half an hour of your time talking to me, you know, and what the story you have is so important for the Vietnamese, for the American, for the Amerasian, for the post-war Vietnam, because, I mean, you are a living part of the history, you know, just, I'm a little bit part of it too, and
Definitely.
I appreciate you had the time, and thank you so much.
Okay, contact me anytime. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.